Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Indivisible Mid-Peninsula's Courage is Contagious podcast. I'm here today with Nancy Nagel, co-founder of Indivisible Mid-Peninsula, and former state senator Joe Simitian. Mr. Simitian is a longtime California leader, policymaker, and champion of community-powered democracy. He served in the California State Senate, on the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, and many other endeavors. And he's known for his deep listening, pragmatic policymaking, and a steady commitment to education, sustainability, and civic engagement. He leads with integrity and teaches people how to turn their values into action. He's built his career on turning community voices into meaningful policy, and he's here with his legendary 13 tips for successful advocacy, which is essentially a masterclass in how ordinary people can create extraordinary change. So welcome, former Senator Joe Simitian. How are you?
Thanks so much, Carla. Good to be with you, and it's kind of you to give me an opportunity to share my thoughts. I had a great time when we visited in person with Indivisible Mid-Peninsula, and I think that was a wonderful session, and so I hope to draw from that experience as we talk today.
Now, you've often said that democracy isn't a spectator sport, which a lot of people think it is. Can you talk about why civic participation matters, especially now in 2025, heading into 2026?
Sure, and it's certainly not an original phrase with me. I remember growing up hearing people say politics is not a spectator sport, and I think that's never been more evident than it is today. And my summary of why it's important, Carla, is really pretty simple. When good people walk away, the bad guys win, and different folks will have different points of view about who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side. But I think if any of us should ask ourselves what happens when the good guys, as we define them, walk away, the answer is decisions get made by other folks, and they're not always going to be to your liking. In fact, you may remember the first question I asked at your Indivisible meeting some months ago was, how many people in the room have good values? And everybody raised their hand. And we all sort of chuckled. And then I said, and how many of you have ever been frustrated that your good values were not respected or reflected by your government at some level? And unfortunately, everybody raised their hand. And that's why we do 13 tips, is so that people who feel like they've got good values, they've got a point of view that needs to be heard, can be more effective as advocates in getting that heard at every level of government. I should mention, in addition to serving in the state Senate and the County Board of Supervisors, I started out as a local school board member, which is ground level democracy, and then as a local mayor and council member, and then in the Board of Supervisors, then in the state assembly, then in the state Senate. So I've had the opportunity to see and hear from a lot of advocates through the years, and have developed a sense of what works and what doesn't, and hope to share some of that in today's conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's amazing. Now, we know you've given your 13 tips for a successful advocacy talk all over California. Do you think we could go through those today? Maybe even with a few stories along the way?
Sure. I think it's it's helpful, and you may recall I've passed this out as a one pager because I find that it's helpful for people to have something to refer to. And if folks who are listening or have an opportunity to watch want to scribble a note or two, that may help them along the way. But there are 13 tips. They can be summarized very briefly or succinctly. We'll round them out a little more fully today. But I've used it myself through the years, and whenever I've come up short, candidly, I have to tell you, I have often found it's because I didn't follow one of my own tips, and I thought, what are you thinking? That's tip number 4 or tip number 8. So let's begin at the beginning. The first couple of tips are, tip number 1 is just develop a relationship before you engage with an elected official or their staff. And then, tip number 2 is understand what motivates those folks and tell them why they should care about the thing you care about. And tip number 3 is understand what's possible and what's not. So, to begin at the beginning, if you walk in the door of an elected official or, step up to the microphone at a city council or school board meeting or a planning commission meeting, without having first introduced yourself in some way and engaged and developed a little bit of a relationship, then, the chances are it's not going to go that well. I mean, think about how, you would respond if I was a stranger walking up to you at the gas station and saying, hey, can you lend me $20? And by the way, if you give me your name and address, I'll send you the 20 back in the mail. And the chances are you're going to go, no, thank you, unless you're a very trusting soul. And the same is true if you walk up to that microphone and the folks up there at the dais, they don't have any idea who you are, why you're there. Most people do not come to say, thanks for a great job. They come because they either have something they want to complain about or ask for. And that can be surprisingly unsettling. Now imagine how differently that goes if you've had a phone call or an exchange of emails with somebody, and when you start to walk up there to that microphone and people start buzzing, who is that? The ripple goes up and down the row. Oh, I talked to that woman today. I'm delighted she's here. I think we can make some progress on this issue. So it's, develop that relationship. And if you can't get directly to the elected, and depending on who, when, and where, and at what level, that may not be possible, then develop a relationship with their staff person. That's often going to be easier and can pay big dividends as well. And then, do your due diligence and understand what motivates them. One of the things that I'm often struck by is people with very sincere and good wishes sometimes having to ask themselves, okay, that's what I care about, but what do they care about? Because if it's a 7-member city council and you need 4 votes, you have to ask yourself, okay, did they care about what I care about? Whatever it is, it engaged you enough to walk up to the microphone, to leave your comfort of your own home, and or to drive all the way to the state capitol or to your local congress member's office. And, again, it may not be what they care about. So you have to sort of do a little homework, think that one through. The example I always use is if you were trying to build a recycling center and needed support from that 7-member council, well, if you got a couple of folks there who are green, good. But you still need a couple more votes. Where are they going to come from? Well, maybe from somebody who needs to know about the wonderful after-school programs that'll serve kids, because they're all about kids in schools. Or somebody on the council who thinks of themselves as the fiscally responsible person, but who doesn't realize, hey, we can avoid some costs in terms of dumping our garbage, and we can pick up a little revenue on the side by having some recyclables in the. So ask yourself, what motivates them? And if it's their ego, so be it. If it's the fact that it'll make them look good politically, so be it. We take our elected officials as we find them, and at least until election time. And so you have to ask yourself, what's going to motivate them? And it may not be what motivated you or me, but they're the ones with the vote in any given circumstance. They're the ones whose help we are seeking, and we got to ask that. And then, as I said, you have to understand what's possible and what's not. And, some of that is strictly a question of, is it legal? You mentioned my reaching out to the community for ideas to implement and to listen to and to see if we could take action on. I called it, there ought to be a law. We had a contest every year for more than a decade. I got all these great ideas when I was in the state legislature, but I occasionally had to email or call somebody and say, hey, great idea, but it's illegal, it's unconstitutional, or it's preempted by federal law. Sometimes it was not practicable because the funds just weren't there. When, if you're in a budget cutting time, and that's too often, then, a multi-billion-dollar proposal, however well conceived it might be, probably just isn't going to fly. And sometimes you have to ask yourself, am I talking to the right person at the right level of government? If you're talking to the school board when it's a city issue, not going to go well. If you're talking to the city when it's a school issue, not going to go well. Could be you're talking to the planning commission at the city when the decision that you're asking for really needs to be made by the city council. Ask yourself, whatever it is I'm asking for, is it possible? Is it doable? And that could be a legal matter. It could be a jurisdictional matter. It could be a money matter. Could be a political matter. Sometimes you'll approach somebody and they'll say, gee, I tried that every year for the last 6-7 years and I couldn't get a second on my motion. All right, well, then beating your head against the wall is probably not a good way. Is there different path in? What do you have to do differently? So as I say, develop a relationship before you go. Understand what motivates the people you're talking to and trying to persuade. And then ask yourself, is this a doable thing to make sure that you're not doing all this good and hard work only to discover that it's a no can do from the start.
I want to ask a question. I don't know if you want if that's okay at this point.
Sure.
Um, just I would love to hear a little bit more about the politically possible part. Like, most of these things you can do research, you can look stuff up. But that one you got to talk to people, right? I mean, you can do some research with past votes, but just wondering about tips you may have about how could someone determine whether there could be a second vote on an issue that you're
Yeah.
bringing before a council member. Yeah.
Well,
Can I add a little bit to that question?
please.
Um, is there a difference in how you approach it, whether you're talking about local government, state government, or federal government?
Well, every venue is going to have its own process and its own political culture. But I think the question I would ask is if you're trying to persuade someone and they've had disappointment, frustration, let's just call it what it is, failure, is there a plausible path to success that you can articulate? You're going to need to work with them to identify a plausible path to success so that you aren't asking them, walking in the door and saying, wouldn't you like to beat your head against the wall yet another time? That's not likely to be successful. Now, it doesn't mean you shouldn't be persistent. In fact, we'll get to that in some of the later tips. I've got a couple of examples. When I was in the state legislature, I was the guy who introduced the hands-free cell phone bill that requires folks to put that cell phone down while they're driving. I thought it would be a lifesaver. I thought it was important, even though people poo-pooed it when I first introduced the bill. And I failed literally 2001, 2002, 2003, 2004, 2005. And at that point, my staff was saying, Joe, you maybe want to give it up. You could start to look a little foolish here. I said, no, I think it's important. And I think there's a path. And as it happens in 2006, the bill was passed by the legislature, signed into law by the governor. And a year after the law was on the books, the death rates in California highways dropped by 20%. There were 700 fewer fatalities. And that happens. Similarly, it took 6 years and I think 3 or 4 different efforts to get the renewable energy bill that I carried passed by the state legislature. But you kind of have to keep asking yourself, all right, is the climate different? Is there a different path I should be taking? Are there different arguments I should be using? Are there different people I should bring into the conversation? So, ask yourself what's politically popular and what's politically possible. Don't let that be a prison that you can't break out of, but you need to make sure you have a plan that respects and reflects that, I think. But again, I would just say, when you're approaching that beleaguered elected official who feels like they've tried, you have to tease out, is there a path to success? And what does that look like? And how plausible is this? Because maybe it's as simple as let's settle for half a loaf. Maybe it's as simple as let's do a pilot project to demonstrate the efficacy of what we're trying to do. And maybe it's as simple as bringing new allies, which is simple but often hard. So, but you got to think that part through if you're going to ask somebody to give it another try.
Very well put. I don't know if you want to get into the national politics right now, but how would you, because I know you mentioned even if you have to appeal to someone's ego to get what you need done, sometimes you just have to do it. So what does that look like right now on the national stage? You see a lot of big companies appealing to an oversized governmental ego, and they're rightfully getting backlash from the people. But sometimes it seems like, how do you justify that? I mean, is there an ego that gets too big that you shouldn't try to appease it?
Yeah, I don't want to suggest, I certainly don't want to suggest that anyone even get in the vicinity of anything that's inappropriate or, God forbid, illegal. And everybody will have their own line that they don't want to cross. But until the next election, at every level of government, the folks you're dealing with are the folks you're dealing with. Now, maybe you just decide, our effort should be delayed if it's an advocacy effort until we have a new cast of characters in place. Fair enough. And then go work to get the right folks elected as you see it. But until that time, one of the things, the tip number 4 is find a floor manager, and which is, a term of art that we used in the legislature to describe the person who will carry your legislation in the other house of the legislature. So when I was in the Senate, I needed somebody after my bill passed the Senate to carry it over on the Assembly, which meant I had to go find a good Assembly member who could make the case. And she or he had to be savvy about what would work in their house. Now, most of the advocates who you work with are going to be members of the citizenry, right? They're going to not be legislators. But they have to ask the same question. If you're bringing an important issue to the national stage or even to your local school board, somebody has to be the somebody who will carry the day for you. And they need to be a person or persons who will commit to understanding your issue, commit to understanding the arguments, both for and against, so that they can rebut the arguments against. They need to understand the dynamic. So the fact that times are challenging is not, in my view, a reason to say, well, we'll just wait until the next election. I think if you feel like you need to stand up and speak out and push back, fine. There's a way to do that, which we'll talk a little bit more about. But again, I would say start with who's your go-to floor manager. When there's a committee debate in the House or a city council debate, you're not going to be able to chime in. Maybe you got to speak at a hearing for 2-3 minutes. So you need somebody who will carry the ball for you, for lack of a less cliched phrase. And, that person is indispensable to a successful effort. And you need clarity on what you want. I call this one, tip number 5, the Joe Jackson principle, because there's a great British singer-songwriter named Joe Jackson, and he's got a song called "You Can't Get What You Want Till You Know What You Want." And that's true for those of us in the public arena, right? When we were talking about all those different venues where I have served in office, 5 different venues over 40 years, I've seen literally thousands of folks come and testify or sit in my office and make a case. And the thing that is most painful is when someone is obviously sincere, obviously passionate about the thing they're concerned about, cares deeply about making a better world or a better neighborhood or a better community. And after you've listened, you think to yourself, I have no idea what they want me to do. And that may sound...
That must be painful as all get out.
Well, it's also painful for the person who's trying to make good things happen, because I've seen people in tears, I've seen people angry and pounding the podium, but if they are so overwhelmed, or sometimes it's people with more data and statistics than you can possibly absorb, but if you've got 3 minutes at the microphone, then use the 3 minutes well. And that first 10 or 15 seconds can be, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I want you to either improve the traffic or deny the project. All right. Now that takes literally a few seconds. And then you've got the rest of your 2-3 minutes to talk about whether it's an anecdote or data or whatever that brought you there. But make sure everybody knows what you want. The same, in Congress these days, things are so tumultuous. Sometimes I think it's hard to let a good idea rise. Like, just ask yourself, all right, what are we trying to do here and why? How will this make somebody's life better? And as an advocate, you should begin with it and often end with that little nugget of here's what I'm asking you to do. Here's why it will make our lives better. So, you gotta know what you want. You're not going to get what you want if you don't know what you want. And then of course you have to tell folks, because they're not mind readers. Sometimes what we think is so obvious is not that obvious to other people. I think we all have listened to folks talk about important issues in our community or in our state or our nation and thought, boy, there was a lot of implicit expectation that we'd understand what they were talking about. But no, I mean, everything from a pothole to a foreign policy change, it needs to be, and I'm not saying oversimplify, but I'm saying cut to the chase, reduce it down to its essential element, put that out on the table so people know what it is. And I'm, as you can tell, I'm a talker, but even so, get that out there right off the bat and make sure you've got somebody there who's going to carry it for you, because just walking in cold rarely goes well. You need an advocate on the school board, the city council, the planning commission, the state legislatures, committee on whatever, same at the national level. Find somebody who can be that person. But again, make sure he or she knows what it is that the goal is, what you want. So that, and I would also say, tip number 6 that I share when we do 13 tips in person is bring solutions, not problems. I've often joked that it seems like every campaign season we hear from candidates saying, elect me, bring me I want to solve the tough problems of our times. And I'm always thinking, really? You woke up in the morning and said, I want some tough problems. I don't know anybody who wakes up and says, bring me the tough problems today. On the other hand, if you can do some homework, come with solutions, help the elected official be the success that he or she wants to be, that's going to get you a much more receptive hearing. And, it could be that you say, well, it's her job, his job, and therefore, they should just take it and go with it. Well, maybe. But if you say, look, we've already worked in our community, we've already built a support network, we've already eliminated some of the opposition that was there, that's going to get a much better hearing, because you're bringing a solution that can help make the elected or even appointed official successful, rather than a problem that's going to have them, crosswise with everybody in town in a matter of minutes, which is too often what people, they just say, well, here's a problem, good luck with that, and then are surprised or disappointed when it doesn't go well. And I also think, tip number 7 is describe the elements of a solution rather than insist on your solution. You don't very often get to say in the public arena, my way or the highway. That's a thumbs up, thumbs down, maybe 50-50 proposition, binary choice. Ask yourself, when I was in the legislature as a brand new member, I remember the training I got, that one of the most frequent things people said is, don't fall in love with your bills. And I thought, well, why not? They're my bills. I think they're great. And what they were really trying to say is there may be more than one way to get a good outcome, to make that thing happen that you so desperately want to happen. And if you are, determined to do it your way and don't hold yourself open to other possibilities, aren't willing to take amendments, aren't willing to let somebody else get credit. I mean, there are a dozen and one ways people can get in the way of their own mission. So, ask yourself, is this going to get us where we want to go, even if it's not quite the route that I thought? And I see you leaning in, Nancy.
Yeah, it just reminds me of getting to yes, to yes about negotiation. Like you put out your interests and you work from that. It's like you're saying, it's the principles.
I've seen it at the local level, for example, when people have labor negotiations, which is where I see interest-based bargaining, as it's sometimes referred to. It's like, wait a minute, we can do this, but that's not going to be very productive, and it's kind of high risk. Or we can do this and say, where do our interests overlap and blend? And in most communities that I've represented, the city or town will tell you, we want to be able to attract and retain the best staff. Most of the school districts that I've represented will say, we want to be able to attract and retain the best staff. And then you talk to their employees who say, well, we can't afford to live in the communities where we work. And all of a sudden you realize, well, okay, if we had some workforce housing, that's not one of these, that's one of these. It's like that works for everybody if we can find a way to make it happen. Let's see if we can. And at a national level, one of my favorite examples is it's often surprised people historically before this year that there was bipartisan agreement and urban-rural agreement on the SNAP program, what we used to call food stamps, CalFresh in California. And the reason was pretty straightforward, was ag folks had an interest in selling their product. Advocates for people of modest means who wanted to make sure that folks had the nutrition they needed. Well, that's one of those times when it's like that if you just let it be. So you don't have to design a program that works exclusively for you. If it can work for others and you can enlist support and allies, that's a good thing. But again, you have to hold yourself open to other ways of solving the problem and not be too rigid about that. And I, since we're on this subject of working with others, this is one I should say. One of the tips that I give that always gets a laugh is do not chastise, insult, or threaten the member or his or her staff. And I know in today's political environment that may seem, a little quaint, but truth be told, it almost never goes well, when someone abuses the elected official or a staff member. And let me be clear, even if you think and believe correctly that they deserve an earful, it's you got to get out of your own way, as I said earlier. And I love to tell the story. Many years ago, I was so mad at one of my colleagues, and I said to my wife, I'm going to tell him blah, 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 blah. And she said, well, you could do that, honey, but, that would be self-indulgent. And I said, what do you mean? And she said, well, you'll feel good for 5 minutes, and then you will have irrevocably damaged your ability to work with that person to help the people that you represent who you tell me you care about and who I do care about. I was a good, in that case, very loving and wonderfully delivered reminder that rarely does anything good. Doesn't mean you can't hold people accountable. Doesn't mean you can't ask hard questions. But most of us had someone in our lives who told us you'll catch more flies with honey than vinegar. And that's true here again. And it's just very, very tough if you've again, one of my favorite examples is at the local level, there's some poor soul who's called the junior planner in the planning department. And they have to take in all these applications from folks who want to do something with their property. And eventually the homeowner or property owner will show up and say, well, why can't I do this? And the planner is trying to explain the code and what the rules are. And, eventually the irate citizen may pound the podium and say, I know the mayor. Well, okay. So at that point, what happens? Well, the junior planner says to himself, good for you, fella. And then the junior planner talks to the senior planner, and then she talks to the city manager, who talks to the mayor, who says, I have no idea who this person is. And then somehow word spreads among the other elected officials. And by the time you show up in a public meeting, your chances are gone. I'm not trying to be a finger wagger here or a behavior police. I'm just saying, if you want to be effective as an advocate, this is just a behavior that won't work for you. And by the way, I wouldn't try it with the staff members either, because again, not only is it not a good way to be, but it's just not going to help you be productive. That staff member, some people think they can disrespect the staff member as long as they're nice with the elected official. Not so. That staff member is going to be the person who advises the elected official. They're going to be the person who decides whether they can or can't put your call through, so, make an appointment available. So it's just, again, we would all like to think that, that's not good behavior, we wouldn't do that. But even if you would, even if your temper gets the best of you, you just kind of have to say, that's not going to make me a successful advocate. And the other thing I would say is, sometimes you have to understand that less is more, by which I mean, If you hand somebody a 20-page document and your really good point is on page 18, you can't be surprised that they didn't get your really good point. There's a term, people say, well, do you have a one-pager on that? Well, that's literally what it is. It's a one-page summary.
I mean, and this can be used for anywhere in life, not just for advocacy, but your job, your family. Everybody wants to be treated respectfully.
I think that's right. And I hear that often after I give the 13 tips talk, that it has applications in business and family and life. And the other thing I hear, which I not only don't resent, I embrace it, is almost everything that we're talking about is something you already know. It's just a question of sort of organizing it in your thoughts and in your approach and in your strategy and tactics to get good things done. And as I said earlier, oftentimes if I have an unsuccessful effort, I will look back and think, all right, what did I miss in terms of my own 13 tips? And usually there's one or two where I think, that's the one I could have and should have been mindful of. And, the other thing I would say, as we sort of power through the last of these tips is, even though I've said understand sometimes less is more, you have to layer your effort, layer your campaign to persuade. And what I mean by that is, if you just come in one way, maybe it's a hit, maybe it's a miss. And, different people receive, process, react to information in different ways. Sometimes that's generational. I remember asking staff member in my office, well, have you really tried to reach them if you haven't heard back from them? And oh yeah, I sent them a second email. I'm like, well, okay. Some people are good with their email, some aren't. Did you call them? Maybe, maybe not. But, unless so-and-so always answers their emails, so-and-so always responds to phone calls, so-and-so always reads their mail, then you have to say, all right, I'm going to send a letter, and I'm going to send a copy of the letter not only to the elected's official office, but maybe they work outside the home. I can send it there. Maybe I have their home address. I can send it there.
I see.
That's more likely at the local level than it is at the national level. Maybe it's a carbon copy to their chief of staff because the busy.
So you mean layer your messaging, like you're
Yes.
talking about communication, and when you say layer the campaign.
This will sound so funny, but the one that, as an analogy, the campaign I remember is an advertising campaign, not just years ago, but decades ago by now, for Snickers, the candy bar. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not a Snickers fan, actually, but I remember they were on television, they were on radio. Yeah. I don't remember if social media was a thing then, but I remember a taxi cab going by with an illuminated Snickers bar on the top. And I thought, these people are everywhere. Somebody has made the decision that they're going to make sure everybody knows that their candy is out there. Well, if you only send a letter, maybe it's somebody who reads the letter, maybe it isn't. Well, if you've already written the letter, is there a community newspaper you could send more or less the same letter to? Maybe you could get a couple of your friends to send the earlier versions of the letter. And then all of a sudden the elected's thinking, oh my gosh, the whole community, my whole district's up in arms about this. And it's really you and a couple of friends who push the send button. You could send somebody to a service club or a public meeting to speak. And, all of a sudden, as I say, the elected officials thinking, oh, I saw it over here and I saw it over there. And if they, miss one along the way, well, you still got another. And each one of them kind of reinforces the other. So it's not just one is less than two, it's less than three. It's, they multiply. It's not just arithmetic. So multiply.
I think this is a real a message that we can use in our organization, because we're always trying to reach new members and get more people activated and engaged.
Yeah, and it could be a little frustrating, I think, because people say, well, should we do this, or this? And the answer is yes.
Yes, exactly.
And
all of the above.
Like, no, I wanted door knocking to be the magic thing, or no, I wanted social media to be the magic thing, or I wanted letters to the editor to be the magic thing. Well, usually you want to put all of that together in a way that, as I say, multiplies the various communications but also make sure that, one form of communication doesn't just go right by somebody and you've missed your opportunity. And that's, to this point, the tip number 11 is persistence pays off. If you are prepared to take no for an answer, you'll get no. I mean, that's it. So you got to keep going. And I on the national scene, for folks who've been disappointed with the results of elections, whether it's presidential or congressional, it's striking to me how many people feel like, well, we worked so hard in the last election. And unfortunately, the answer is, yeah, that was the last election. Here comes the next one, and the next, and the next. And look, I understand people have lives, they have other things they have to do. But if you get no for an answer and keep taking no, you're going to keep getting no. I mentioned earlier the hands-free cell phone bill that I carried as an author. I literally tried 5 times in 5 years to make that happen and failed every single time until I didn't. And that 6th time it passed and lives were saved. I think that's indicative of the fact that persistence pays off. Same with renewable energy. When I first started making the pitch for 33% renewable energy by 2020, people, that's too ambitious. You'll never make that. Well, yes, it took 6 years. And yeah, we had to get past a veto from the governor 1 year. And 1 year we ran out of time because it was 11:53 and the clock was going to strike midnight. We just couldn't get the bill off the floor. And there's always something. And you just got to keep going. And maybe this year they wouldn't give you the money for that recycling center that I talked about earlier, but next year's another year, and you have more time now to lay your case and learn from your mistakes. And so keep going, keep going, keep going. And really all of these tips are, kind of wrapped up in tip number 12, which is make it easy to say yes. And again, to the point you made about, these are tips that are good in all facets of life. It's like, that 20-page document that I described that had the good information on page 18, you didn't make it easy for somebody to find your best argument. They might have been willing to say yes, but you needed to persuade them, and you made it hard. They don't have time to read 20 pages. They're busy. So if you insult an elected official, then you've made it harder for his or her colleagues to be on your team, because they're going to have to work with that person day after day, week after week, month after month, and year after year. So just ask yourself, am I making it easy to say yes? If you've asked for a meeting and given one window, and I had this happen. I remember many years ago, somebody asked for a meeting up in Sacramento. And they said, well, we want to meet on a Monday from, I think it was like 1:30 to 2:30. And my staff had to politely decline and explain. And the people were disappointed and said, oh, but he's our assembly member. And they said, well, unfortunately, he serves on 3 different committees all at the same time. And while we can get him to 3 different places at once, we can't get him to 4 different places at once and give you a decent meeting. Now, if they had said, hey, we're coming up to the state capitol and we're going to be up there for 2 days and we need a half hour on Monday or Tuesday, sometime between 10 and 6, then it's easy to say yes. And so you're got to ask yourself, okay, if we're trying to get something done, what makes it? That's why you bring solutions instead of problems, to make it easy to say yes. And the last thing I would say, and you've been really gracious and generous with time here, is I think tip number 13 is to remember the value of a thank you. And I want to say what I said earlier, which is this is not simply about being polite or nice or behaving like our parents raised us to be. And God knows there's a lot of trash talk in the political world these days. But almost every decision that an elected official is asked to make involves disappointing somebody who didn't get the money, somebody who was on the other side of the issue, somebody who thought they didn't get hurt, whatever it is. So when we forget to say thank you, it makes us less likely to prevail the next time. And there will be a next time. People like, well, I'm just going to, no, there's going to be a next time. You're going to want to come back and ask for that money for the recycling center again. the development proposal that failed 4-3, the developer will be back and he wants, to get a successful vote the next time. As I said, when I carried that bill 6 times on the cell phone issue or over 6 years on the renewable energy issue, you're coming back. So you got to say thank you, because you're asking people to make hard choices. You're asking them to disappoint somebody. And we can say, and I understand the inclination to say, well, they should just do it because it's the right thing. Well, yeah, they should. But in the real world, if somebody kind of got beaten about the head and shoulders to be your advocate and you forget to say thank you, you can't be surprised that they're not all that anxious to step up the next time. My own personal favorite example, and I'll close with this, is, and this was many years ago, first time I was on the Board of Supervisors, I had the opportunity to do some volunteer work in Albania and Kosovo. It was during a really tumultuous time in that part of the world. And, we saw the pictures that unfortunately we see too often still today of, hundreds of thousands of refugees moving across borders under very painful conditions. And I was asked by a group called IRC, the International Rescue Committee, would I be willing to volunteer? And I said, yes, I would. And I went abroad for 2.5, 3 weeks. And I should be very clear. I was a low-level volunteer. I wasn't, a decision maker, quote unquote. I was just somebody on the ground trying to pitch in and do their part. And I got back to my office after being away almost 3 weeks. And the folks in my office said, look, we know you're tired, but we got to ask you, can you make this event this Sunday? There is a Not in Our Town rally at the JCC, the Jewish Community Center. And I said, well, what's that about? And they said, well, while you were gone, there were these horrible anti-Semitic phone calls that came in. So the JCC, the Jewish Community Center, is having a Not in Our Town rally. They'd like you to be one of 12 speakers, each of whom speaks for 2 minutes. And it's on Sunday from, I think, 1 to 3. And I remember in the moment thinking, I'm exhausted. The trip was grueling physically. The trip was grueling emotionally. I haven't spent a weekend with my wife in a month at this point. And they want me to speak for just 2 minutes, and I'm just 1 of 12, and it'll be hot and it'll run long. But anyway, I still say, yeah, tell them I'll be there, because I thought I should. So I go, and it's everything I thought. It runs long. It's hot. It's a hot summer day. And I'm actually one of 13 speakers who was asked to speak for 2 minutes. And I'm buried kind of right in the middle. And the part that just made me smile inside was I was following immediately the internationally renowned folk singer Joan Baez, who spoke as well. And now I'm thinking, oh, sure, people want to hear from their county supervisor after they've just heard from Joan Baez. But still, I went. I was glad I had done it. Fine. That's a Sunday. And it does run long, and so be it. So a couple of days later, I'm at work. And it's just one of those days that we all have where, you think, can nobody act right all day long? I mean, what happened on this day that everybody is just scratchy and difficult? And so I leave work early. For me, I'm a night guy, so I leave early, like 5:30ish. And this is how it was, a while ago, because I stop at the video store on the way home. And I prowl the aisles looking for a couple of things that are totally mindless, so I can just go home, put my feet up, and relax. And I walk up to the counter, and there's this young guy, and he's kind of got a punk vibe, and he's got some spray painted hair and some piercings, and he's not paying any attention at all to the store, as far as I can tell. So I put my stuff down, and it kind of clatters on the glass top, and he still doesn't look up, and he just says name. And I said, well, Joe Simitian. And then his head pops up and he says, are you the Joe Simitian? Yeah, which might or might not be a good thing. And so I kind of chuckle and say, well, it depends. Which Joe Simitian are you asking about? And, very earnestly, this young guy looks at me and says, the Joe Simitian who spoke at the JCC this weekend. And probably because I had stereotyped him a bit based on his appearance, which is a shame on me, bad on me. I was startled, and I said, "Yeah, how do you know that?" And he looked at me and he said, "Well, because I was there and I heard what you said. It was
Wow.
important. It mattered a lot." And in that moment, without intending it, I feel sure, and probably without even realizing it, that young man made sure that I would never hesitate for a moment if I was asked back to a similar event. And that's been 25 years now, and it stays with me. So as you can tell, that's the power of a thank you. And I want to encourage all of your good advocates to remember that thank you, because it will have power in the work that they do. And I hope all of those 13 tips are of use to some or all of your team.
Oh, for sure. I think these are very valuable.
Joe, you told that same story at our meeting,
I know.
I did.
but it didn't mean that I didn't cry again this time.
Well, I
Isn't
think,
that funny?
yeah, no, it's just,
It's a great story.
as I say, we all would like to believe that people will do the right thing because they should do the right thing, and certainly our elected officials. But it's harder to do the right thing
Yeah.
again and again if there isn't some acknowledgement of that thank you. And it's sometimes it will be a letter to the editor in the newspaper or a post online where someone gives you a shout out, and number one, you're just appreciative that somebody kind of understood that there was a personal cost, a political cost to your effort. But number two, you're also thinking, okay, this is a good ally, because when I make that effort, they're going to give me a shout out and some recognition out there in the public. Most of us,
Right.
just human nature, we are quick to criticize, but do we take that extra minute to tell someone that somebody on their team did a great job, or to say to somebody, thanks again, I know you had to put yourself out? I wish I could say it happened more often, but it doesn't always. So
I mean, those of us who want to do the right thing and do it, we're also human.
yeah,
And
yeah,
it just makes a big difference to be acknowledged.
yeah,
Oh, someone noticed.
yeah,
It's a big deal.
yeah. And as I say, I think, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to share these tips with your team. As I say, I hope they're helpful. My experience is that if you follow all 13 of these tips, you will be more successful than you would be if you didn't follow the 13 tips. And I refresh my own memory and thinking. I take a look at the list from time to time and say, okay, if this is where you're, you may recall when we all met together, I had an effort to rescue a low-income housing project in my district as a county supervisor. And I was trying to pull the city of Palo Alto into the mix. And we brought 500 people to a rally, which was an extraordinary turnout. But I also knew that nobody wants to hear from 500 people. So we picked 3 people, and I certainly wasn't one of them, to speak to the city council that night. And all these people swept into the chambers and then packed the place and then swept out, leaving this empty hall. And it was very powerful in that the point was crisp and clear. We made it with 3 people, and the bodies were there to say the whole community cares. And it's a as you say, it's a very human thing. All right.
This is a side story. I know you want to go, but I used to work for the city of Palo Alto for from 2001 to 2015 in the finance department. Anyway, so been to many council meetings where you have a million speakers, and boy, was that a big service you made to the council members and all the staff people to have 3 people represent the points of all those 500.
Yeah, no,
I'm sure it was much more effective because of it as well.
And it may be, it may not even be conscious, but when somebody's hearing the same thing for the 20th, 30th, 40th, 50th time, there can be a little resentment, for lack of a better word. And I don't think that anybody consciously thinks, thank you for being crisp. And as I said, you can always, if you have people there, have them stand. Or in our case, we just had them sweep into the room and sweep out again. And there are other ways to show it. People can simply raise their hands. That's fine. But no, I agree with you. And I've had the same experience. I think people do appreciate it when you resist the temptation to pile on, particularly at the end of a long night. And by the way, that means then there's time to actually solve the problem.
Thank you so much for sharing these tips with us. I know that our hour is up, but do you have time to answer a couple more questions, or do we need to let you go?
No, that's fine.
Okay. So trying to make things practical pretty much right off the bat, if somebody's listening right now and they want to take action, but maybe they've never taken action before, where should they start? What is your advice for that?
My advice is simple. Do something. And do the thing that you will do. People say, well, I don't think I'm ever really going to sit down and write that handwritten thank you note. Great. Then send an email. Now, is a handwritten thank you note, precisely because it's a little dated, sort of still the gold standard, the thing that'll get noticed? Yeah. And I can tell you from my own offices through the years, the staff always puts the thank you notes front and center for the elected officials. So you want to get your material read, make it a thank you note. But mostly I would just say, in response to your question, do whatever the thing you'll do is. Most of us aren't going to get up at 5 a.m. for our exercise program, but we can take a walk around the block. Okay, do the thing you'll actually do, whether it's an email instead of, and if you want to aspire to do more, to do better, fine, that's good. But the short answer is do the thing. If you hate door knocking, then do postcards. If you aren't proficient on one tool, use another tool. If you don't like Facebook, but you're all over LinkedIn, fair enough. Whatever your thing is, but do something. I don't know what to do, respectfully, not an answer I would be prepared to take.
And a lot of people these days are disillusioned by politics. Maybe that's always been the case. I don't know, but certainly today they are. So do you have one piece of advice that you could give to people who are disillusioned? Something to make them feel hopeful and want to be involved in the democratic process?
I would say, as I said earlier, that when good people walk away, then the bad guys win. And so I would keep that top of mind. The other thing I would say is, look, it's hard. I know it's hard. But, I mentioned I had this contest called There Ought to Be a Law, where I solicited ideas from the public to turn into legislation and to pursue. And what I can tell you and what I can share with any of your listeners is 21 of those ideas over the course of a decade were passed by the legislature and signed into law by the governor. And they are laws that are on the books today. And some of them are big, some of them are more modest, but they came from individuals, most of whom probably thought, oh, nobody listens, nobody cares, I can't make a difference. And they sent in, we framed it as a contest, they sent in their contest entry, and today those laws are on the books, and a number of them have saved lives. I know that for a fact.
That is amazing.
And you got to start somewhere. Look, one of my, they're all favorites, but one of the ones I hold most dear is I had a constituent who sent in a proposal for breast cancer screening for women with dense breast tissue. And when I first started talking about the issue, nobody really knew what I was talking about. We got tremendous bipartisan support for the bill, and the governor vetoed the bill. So as I mentioned earlier, then you got to come back again. You got to ask yourself, what do we need to do this time? And, I had heard that the governor's office thought, well, nobody cares about this except Senator Simitian. So I went out and got 101 co-authors, which when you only have 119 colleagues is, pretty good.
Wow.
And we did other things as well to try and bring it around. And that bill passed. It was my last year in the state legislature. California became, I think, the fourth or fifth state in the country to pass similar legislation. And just last year in 2024, the law went national. And today, every radiologist in the country provides the same notice that my constituent, or virtually the same, that my constituent thought more than a decade ago every woman was entitled to. And so she made an immediate and demonstrable difference in California, a state with 40 million people, and ultimately contributed to the fact that the effort went national. And today, 350 million Americans are the beneficiaries of this process, and notice that simply wasn't there for them until people stepped up. So I don't want to say it's easy. It's not. I don't want to say success is guaranteed. It's not. But I do know that, forgive the sports metaphor, I try to stay away from those, but the hockey great Wayne Gretzky said, you miss every shot you don't take. And for your activists, I would say, you're never going to be successful unless you step up and step in. And I know for a fact, if you just walk away, there are plenty of folks who don't share your values who'll step into that vacuum. And one person can make a difference, and they do every day.
We really want to thank you for spending time with us today and sharing these tips.
Thank you. And I'll give myself the last word, if I may, which is please exhort your members to go out there and make the world a better place. Okay?